Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Lesson 11 of Chef's Apprentice, learning to cook like a pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is Thai spare ribs with a citrus dipping sauce. This preparation introduces pork. Different parts of the hog yield very different flavors, so different that it's surprising that they all come from the same animal. In this dish, you will learn to cook pork spare ribs. We will make a lemongrass marinade that sweetens the meat. Cooking low and slow then concentrates the flavor, and we will make a citrus dipping sauce to provide a sour counterpoint. After you learn to braise spare ribs, you can vary the marinade and vary the sauce, but the cooking process will stay basically the same. Techniques today are making a marinade, whisking, emulsifying, and chopping, making a dipping sauce, marinating, seasoning, and braising. So let's start cooking. Okay, here we are at the board for Lesson 11, Thai spare ribs with citrus dipping sauce. Trying something a little bit different today so we can get some more face time. Start with the ingredients, which is the ingredients part of our mise. So obviously we're going to need some spare ribs, and here I have one rack of spare ribs. Now the description that comes from the video says that we'll need 2 racks, and that is to serve a larger number of people. We're just going to do 1 rack today. Now, this is a spare rib, I should say a rack of spare ribs, and there's a difference between this and baby back ribs. The spare rib comes from the lower part of the belly, and it tends to have bones that are straight and long. Now, this is a St. Louis style cut spare rib, so the ribs have actually been shortened. They've been cut to make a very uniform piece of meat here. Okay, now the baby back ribs, on the other hand, they tend to have more curved bones, and they come from the higher on the hog, between the spine and the spare ribs. Now the spare ribs, they are cooked low and slow, and they take a longer time to cook. Baby back ribs, they are usually cooked low and slow too, but they take a shorter time to cook. Okay, so next thing we need is the ingredients for the marinade. Okay, so for one thing first thing we're going to need is fish sauce. Fish sauce is made from fermented anchovies. I'm not sure whether we've used it in a prior lesson or not, but you can find this in almost any grocery store, certainly at Whole Foods, and certainly in any Asian grocery store. We'll also need to have peanut oil. We're not going to need a lot of that. We'll also need to have soy sauce, and in some prior lessons I've used some finer soy sauce. Today we're just going to use some kind of a commodity soy sauce like the Kikkoman brand of soy sauce. And we'll also need the juice of 2 limes, and we will need garlic. Now, in prior lessons I have sometimes used a head of garlic that we've peeled. In other lessons I've used this Christopher Ranch peeled garlic. Today we're going to use both, actually, because I have some garlic from the head that needs to be used up, and I also have some garlic in this bag that's been pre-peeled that needs also to be used up. We're also going to need some lemongrass. Now, lemongrass you can buy, I bought this at Whole Foods in this little package, and it comes in a stalk. And often, if you find it in the whole stalk, the stalks will be actually about that long. This is 2 pieces of lemongrass. This is all we're going to need. You can also find lemongrass that comes in a tube, kind of like a paste. And that's what I actually prefer to use. It's easier to work with, but I couldn't find any today. They often carry it at Whole Foods and other grocery stores. I've seen it at the Giant grocery store. I don't know if that's in your area or not. But you can probably also find that paste on the internet. I'll try to find a link for it and put it into the description section. So we'll need some lemongrass stalks or lemongrass paste. We'll also need some cilantro. We're going to need a whole bunch of cilantro. And you know, cilantro, some people don't like it at all. And the reason is that supposedly, this is what I've been told, there's a gene that some people have that causes cilantro to taste like soap in their mouths. Luckily, I don't have the cilantro soapy gene, and neither does my wife, so we will be using cilantro in this preparation. But if you don't like cilantro, or if you know that some of your guests don't like cilantro, or they have that soapy gene, you could leave it out. You could use parsley instead to provide the same kind of color. We're also going to need some ginger. Now, I think I showed you in a prior lesson that you can use fresh ginger, but I use ginger that I preserve either in a container of sake or a container of sherry. I have both, and it keeps in there really forever. So we're going to use the preserved ginger. We're also going to need sugar. Now, the ideal sugar to use for this preparation, because it's an Asian marinade, is palm sugar. Palm sugar is pretty easy to find. I have here actually 3 different varieties of palm sugar. There's the kind that is comes in a container like this, and it's kind of hard, and it gets as hard as a rock. You can nuke it a little bit to loosen it up, but I tend not to use this very much because it's just harder to work with. You can also find it in granulated form, and I bought it in a larger bag and put it into a smaller container, but this is basically granulated palm sugar. It also comes in a form that's very similar to brown sugar, and this is granulated, but it sticks together more like brown sugar sticks together. And this is the Wholesome brand of organic coconut palm sugar, which I got at Whole Foods. So I think using the granulated kind, or the kind that has the consistency of brown sugar, is really the easiest and the best, rather than using this other type, which is more of a paste, and it gets hard as a rock. Also, if you don't have access to palm sugar, if it's not readily available, you could use light or dark brown sugar. And this is actually granulated sugar container in which I have filled it with light brown sugar. So you can use either one, either the light brown or dark brown sugar, or the palm sugar. And then finally, for the marinade, we're going to need some sesame oil. Okay, so those are the ingredients for the marinade. Now, for the dipping sauce, we're going to need 2 more limes. We're also going to need rice vinegar, and this brand is commonly available in most grocery stores, and certainly in Whole Foods or online. We'll also need the soy sauce that we used in the marinade. We're also going to use the palm sugar in this dipping sauce. We're also going to need garlic, and we will also need sesame oil, which was also in the marinade. And we'll need some cilantro. And then finally, for the dipping sauce, we're going to use something hot. And you really have a choice here. You can either use some Thai red curry paste, which this is the Thai Kitchen brand, which is available in many grocery stores and at Whole Foods. Or you can use some Sriracha red chili sauce. Either one. I wouldn't recommend using both because it might get too spicy. Also, I think the flavors would probably cancel each other out. You wouldn't really notice a distinct difference between the two. So I just use one or the other. Also to avoid having it getting it too hot. Okay, so now we're going to break, and we're going to clear all this away, and we're going to come back and I'm going to show you the equipment that we need for lesson 11. Okay, we're ready to go over the equipment that we'll need for lesson 11. Of course, we'll need to have cutting board, as we almost always do. We'll need to have a chef's knife. We'll also need to have a slicing knife. We will also need to have a juicer to squeeze the juice out of the limes. And we'll need to have a grater. Now, there's various ways that you can grate this ginger, and I'm going to kind of give you overkill on the graters. This is a simple grater. This would work just fine. This is an OXO grater. They make great products. This is a microplane grater, and this would work as well, very well, also. In a recent Instagram post, I got into a discussion about graters, and I mentioned Shark skin grater. Shark skin grater is the way that they would grate ginger in Japan. It's also used to grate fresh wasabi root, which you don't see here in the United States. Fresh wasabi, by the way, is totally different from the wasabi that we get with sushi here in the US. It's much milder and a bit more granular, less pasty, because it's been ground fresh on a shark skin grater like this. Yes, real shark skin, and you grate the ginger on there. There's another type of grater which comes from Japan, and this is metal. It has these little tines, and they're very sharp. And this is great for grating ginger, but I also view this as a chef skin grater, because if you get down too close to the teeth on this thing, it will grate your skin right along with the ginger or the garlic or whatever it is that you're trying to grate. So although I have one of these, I really don't like to use it. I really prefer to use, I actually most often use the microplane grater or this grater, and every now and then I will use the shark skin grater. So that's grater. Okay, we'll also need 1 or 2 mixing bowls. We're going to make the marinade now, and we're going to marinate the spare ribs overnight. And we could make the dipping sauce tomorrow. If we're going to make one day and one the other day, you really only need 1 bowl. But if we make one right after the other, we're either going to need 2 bowls, or we're going to need to wash out the marinade bowl after we have put the pork into the marinade. So I have 2 bowls handy here. We'll also need a metal spoon for spooning the dipping sauce into the dipping sauce plates. And we will need, what else do we need? We'll need a whisk. The whisk will be for purposes of making the marinade. The marinade is going to be a mixture of oil and water-like liquids, non-oily liquids. And we're going to mix them up with this whisk, which will put them into an emulsion, meaning that the oil and water will become suspended together. And a whisk is really the best way to do that. We also have a wooden spoon, which we could use. We'll also probably use that for the dipping sauce. And then we will need a bag, a marinating bag, to put the ribs in with the marinade. And then I always put that into a pan, so if it leaks, it doesn't go all over the refrigerator. And finally, we will need to have some dipping sauce plates. So break for a moment, and I'll be back with the dipping sauce plates. Okay, so before we talk about the dipping sauce plates, I wanted to add in one other piece of equipment, and that is we're going to use a 1/4 cup measuring cup. Now remember, we're not really measuring using exact measurements in this course. We're learning how to cook intuitively. We're learning how to decide how much we want, how much we need. We're learning to choose how much we want to use based upon what we like and how we want it to taste. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this 1/4 cup measuring cup to make the marinade and to make the dipping sauce, but not necessarily because we're going to be using a 1/4 cup. We're going to be using it for proportions of ingredients. Now let's talk a little bit about dipping sauce plates. Now I have here 3 different plates that can be used for dipping sauces. And again, your reaction might be, well, I don't have any of that. Remember, we are learning how to cook like a pro, okay? So if we're learning how to cook like a pro, we're going to need to have the equipment basically that a restaurant would have. All right, now, so remember that the spare ribs are long, and so if we were to use something like a ramekin, it wouldn't actually be very easy to dip the spare ribs into the ramekin to get some sauce on them. So instead, we want to use something that's kind of shallow. This is a little plate. It's shallow. You could get the rib into that and get some dipping sauce onto the rib. These plates, I think, would be kind of ideal for this application because they're long and they're shallow, and they kind of mimic the bone of the rib in some regard. So this is something that you need to think about. If you're going to be serving a dish that would be comparable to what you get in a restaurant, you want it to be, of course, to be well prepared. You want it to taste well, taste great, and you want it to be well plated, attractively plated, and also it has to make sense. So if you're going to provide a dipping sauce with these ribs, you need to have a dipping sauce plate that makes sense. So something like this is what we're going to use for this particular preparation. All right, so now I'm going to break, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to start cooking. Okay, so here we are back at the board. We're going to start lesson 11, and we have our prep list here as always. And the first thing on the list, and I've given the things on this list, I've given them double asterisks because these are the things that we need to do the day before we cook it, because we're going to be marinating overnight. So everything with a double asterisk, that's something that we need to do now. And that starts with chopping the garlic. Now, I'm not going to chop all this garlic in front of you because we've done it before. I'm going to chop it off camera. But what I'm going to do is just a couple of things, just as a refresher. So one is we're using garlic off of the head of garlic. And so to get this skin off the garlic, we press down on the side of the chef's knife and the paper type peel of the garlic. That comes right off. Okay, so we'll do that just on a couple of pieces here. Comes right off. Okay, now the other thing that we need to do, remember, is we need to cut off the root end, all right? And we need to do that on both the garlic that came off the head and the pre-peeled garlic that I had here. And the other thing that we want to do is get the germ out of the center, if it's showing. So you can see here that there's a green kind of a sprout in the center of this garlic. And that is the called the germ, and that that's where the garlic would grow. If you planted this clove in the soil, it would grow from here and give you a new head of garlic eventually. So we're going to take that germ out. These pieces that came out of the vacuum sealed bag, they don't seem to be showing any germs, so we don't have to remove it there. And this other piece that came out of the head of garlic, I can see that there is a germ there. You see it? Green. We're going to take that out of the center. Now, could you leave that? You could leave it, yes. Just makes the garlic a little bitter. Would you really notice the difference? Probably not. Especially since we're using it here in a marinade. This is not something where you'll be tasting the garlic taste directly. It will just be infusing flavor into the marinade. All right, so I'm going to, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to chop some cilantro. Now I'm also going to do that off camera. It's the same as chopping the parsley that we've done in prior lessons, and it's also the same in the sense that you want to try to get rid of the large pieces of stem if you can. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut off some of these larger pieces of stem and try to leave mostly the leaves. But if you have the stem that is with the leaves, that's okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to chop this cilantro and chop the garlic off camera, and when we get back, we'll talk about how much we're going to need. Okay, so we've chopped a bunch of garlic, we've chopped that whole bunch of cilantro, and so now we're going to talk about how much. Now, as I've said before, it's really a matter of personal taste. If you like garlic, use more garlic. If you don't like garlic, use less or don't use it at all. Although I wouldn't recommend not using it because it really does impart flavor to the marinade that you might not taste directly when you eat the spare ribs later on. I think that for the marinade, remember we have a slab of pork that is this big. We're going to cut this in half before we put it into the marinating bag, and we want to have enough marinade to basically to cover that pork once it's in the marinating bag. So let's use two different bowls for purposes of making the marinade and the sauce, and I'd say let's use about a quarter of a cup roughly. Now this is a quarter of a cup here, so you can see that's roughly about a quarter of a cup. That's how much, maybe it's a little bit more than that. That's how much we're going to use in the marinade. Okay, so we're going to take that, we're going to put it into the bowl for the marinade. Okay, then the other garlic, that is going to go into the sauce. And now, remember, we have a whole slab of ribs, so we're going to need more garlic to go into the marinade so we can marinate all of those ribs. For the dipping sauce, we're just going to be getting a little bit of this dipping sauce each time we dip the ribs into it. So we don't need as much garlic. We use roughly about 2 tablespoons. That's probably about 2 tablespoons there. We'll take the rest and we'll put it into the marinade. Okay. Then, let's check our prep list. We've chopped the garlic for the marinade and for the sauce. We've chopped the cilantro. Now we're going to need a little bit of the cilantro for purposes of giving color and some flavor to the dipping sauce, but mostly for color. So again, we're going to use about 2 tablespoons worth. That's probably about a tablespoon, and that's probably about a tablespoon. And we're going to put the rest of it, and we'll put just a little bit more into this dipping sauce. And we'll put the rest of it into the marinade. Okay. All right, so we have now chopped the cilantro for both the marinade and the dipping sauce. Now we need to get the lemongrass ready. So with lemongrass, what you want to do is you want to crush it. Some people will say bruise it, hit it. I don't know why you have to be mean to it. I think crushing it is really all you need to do. And we want, again, we'll have about, again, we're probably going to want to use about the same amount of that we had of the garlic, which was roughly 2 tablespoons. Oh no, I think we used about 1/4 cup. So once we have crushed this a bit with the side of the chef's knife, why do we do that? It helps to release the flavor. Helps to release the flavor. And then we're going to chop it finely. It's also a lot easier to chop if you crushed it or bruised it like I just showed you. Take the rough pieces, get rid of those. Ones you can't really chop. Okay, and so that's about half as much as we used of the garlic. So let's use the rest of this lemongrass. Again, does it really matter whether you have more or whether you have less? No, it's a marinade. It's going to help to impart flavor. If you use a little bit more, a little bit less, you won't really be able to tell the difference. If you didn't use any at all, you might not pick up that flavor. But if you use a little bit more, a little bit less, you're really not going to notice the difference. Okay, so then we have the lemongrass, which is going to go into the bowl there. A little bit escaped. All right. Now, next thing we need to do is to put in the juice of 2 limes. So let's take our limes. What do? We cut off the ends. Why do we do that? We do that so that when we put them into the juicer, the squeezer, the juice can come out the bottom of the lime and doesn't jam up, or I should say clog up the holes in the bottom of the juicer. So we're going to just squeeze this juice in here. I like to turn them inside out once I've squeezed them. Get some more juice that way. See how much more juice came out? And do all 4 of these halves that way. Flip them over. Squeeze them again. You can see how much more juice you get. Okay, one more. Okay. Now some people will then take one and put it on top of the other, And you will get even some more juice that way, but I think we have enough. All right. Next, we need to grate the ginger. Now again, how much ginger do we need? Well, we want to have about half as much ginger as we had of the garlic. It's just a proportion that I like. Could you use a different proportion? Yes, you could. And what I'm going to do is refresh the cut. And I am not going to peel this because it's just going into a marinade. Now let's try using this shark skin grater and see how it works. You can see it grates that ginger very finely. But it's not as fast as I would like. So we get the extra ginger off of that shark skin grater, and we're going to use this grater and finish it off. Now you see my technique here. I'm leaning the grater on the cutting board, holding it in this hand, and then rubbing the ginger over it. Now, do you have to grate it? No, you don't really have to grate it. You could chop it very finely. What we're doing when we're grating it, we're releasing flavor, we're releasing liquid, we are increasing surface area to get as much of that ginger flavor as possible. If we were to have chopped it, and we chop it very finely, well, it's not going to be quite as fine as this, so you might not release quite as much flavor, but you're still going to get a lot of gingery flavor. Here we have basically some fiber that's left over. We're going to get rid of that and put this into, put this into the bowl. All right, next thing we need to do is add the liquids. Now, first thing that we need to add is the fish sauce. Now, how much you use really depends upon how much liquid you need for marinade, which depends on how much pork you need, right? So for that much pork, what we're going to do is we're going to use proportions. So we're going to use this 1/4 cup measuring cup, and we're going to use 2 parts. Okay, so we're going to call this 1/4 cup a part. If you had more pork that you needed to marinate, you might want to use twice this much. So you might use either a 1/3 of a cup or a 1/2 cup measuring cup as your part. But here, we're going to use the 1/4 cup as the part, and we're going to use 2 parts of fish sauce. Let's switch hands with this. Now, if some goes in there, you know, and it doesn't go into the cup, it's not crucial. A little bit more, a little bit less is not going to make that much difference. All right, so we're using 2 parts of the fish sauce. Now, why 2 parts? Well, it's because I've done this before. I've worked in this recipe, and I think the proportions that we're using make for a good marinade. Now, you might like it in a different way. You might like different proportions. But we're going to use 2 parts of the fish sauce to 1 part of the peanut oil. Sorry, I almost used the ingredient from the tasting sauce. So we're going to use 1 part. So we called this a part. We used 2 of these. Now we're going to use 1 part of the peanut oil. We're also going to use 1 part of the soy sauce. Soy sauce is pretty strong. You know, you don't want to use too much of it. It will just take over everything else that's in the preparation. But we have twice as much fish sauce, and we have a lot of lime juice in there too. And we also already have the juice of the 2 limes in there. We have the garlic in there. We have the lemongrass in there, and the cilantro, and the ginger. And now we're going to need some sugar, 1 part sugar. Now we're going to use this this palm sugar that's kind of like brown sugar, and we're going to use about 1 part of it. So that's about half a part, and that's about half a part. So together, that would have been about 1/4 of a cup. That's what we're using, which is 1 part. Okay. And again, is that crucial? It's adding sweetness. Is it crucial that you have a little bit more, a little bit less? No. And then finally, we want to use some sesame oil. And here we're going to use about 1/2 a part. So we're going to use about half of this 1/4 cup measured cup. Sesame oil is really meant for aroma and to some extent flavor, and you don't need a lot of it. All right, then what we're going to do is we're going to whisk it, okay? And whisking, remember, as I said before, suspending a water-like liquid like soy sauce or the rice vinegar or the fish sauce, something that doesn't have any oil in it, suspending that with oil is called creating an emulsion. So we're using the whisk to emulsify this marinade, mixing basically mixing oil and water, so they're suspended together. Okay, that's beautiful. You can see it there. All right, now next thing we need to do, make sure we have everything on the prep list. We have the fish sauce, the peanut oil, the soy sauce, the lime juice, the garlic, the lemongrass, the cilantro, the ginger, the sugar, and the sesame oil, which we have whisked and emulsified. Then we want to marinate overnight. Now let's just move this aside, and I'm going to use my Jokari bag filler, which I love. Makes it easier, I should say, to get things into a Ziploc bag. Cleaner, less messy. Oh, but what I do want to do first is I want to slice the rack in half so it will fit into the bag. Okay. All right. So we're going to use our slicing knife for that. Turn it over on the bone side, the back side, and also sometimes with ribs there is a membrane on the back. And if there is, and there is in this case, depends on really whether the butcher has already removed that membrane. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Really no way to predict. And you want to tear that membrane off. The reason you want to tear it off is because if you leave it on, the marinade can't really get to the bottom of the ribs. It can be a pain in the butt to tear it off. This one is coming off amazingly easily, which is great since I'm on camera. And you get off what you can. Some down here as well. Sometimes if you have trouble grabbing this and getting it off, you can take a paper towel. That will help to grab it. So you can pull it. You can also use a kitchen towel, grab it and pull it. All right, so we've gotten the membrane off and cut it roughly in half. Okay, and then let's put this aside for a second and bring our bag back, and then we want to put the ribs down into the bag. Good. How easy that was? Okay. Wash my hands. All right, now we're going to pour the marinade into the bag. And I'm going to grab a rubber spatula so we can get all of this marinade out of here. You could do this with a spoon as well, but a spatula, rubber spatula, is more effective. And as I've mentioned in prior lesson, if you are creating a sauce in a bowl like this and you get it all out of the bowl and and you don't use a spatula, you could leave a whole person's serving worth of sauce in the bowl. So really keep your food costs down, and to make the most efficient use of what you're making, use a spatula to clean the bowl. Okay, so now we just need to seal up the bag, and as I've said before, you want to try to get as much of the air out as you can. Why do you do that? It's not bad to have the air in there, but what you don't want is you don't want to have, I'm getting some leaking here, which is why we use this pan. You don't want to have too much air in there, because then it's hard for the it's hard to get the marinade to cover the ribs. Now, I'm going to marinate this in the refrigerator overnight. What I'll probably do, it is now 5 p.m., probably just before bedtime, I'm going to turn it over. You can do that if you like, you don't have to do it, but that way it helps to make sure that the marinade has been distributed well to all of the ribs. And so like I said, it's 5 p.m. now. We're not going to start cooking this until tomorrow afternoon. So it's going to marinate for about 20 hours or so. But it doesn't have to be that long. I think just overnight, even 8 hours is enough. So we're going to break now, and I will come back tomorrow when we're ready to cook these ribs. Okay, I said that I would come back tomorrow, but actually I decided to make the dipping sauce today, since we've already put some of the ingredients into one of the bowls. So to make the dipping sauce, what we need to do is get the juice out of 2 more limes. So we'll do them the same way that we did the last ones. Cut the ends off, cut them in the center, and then use the squeezer, the juicer, squeeze the juice into the bowl. Flip them over, do it again. All right. Now, you might ask, well, what's the difference between this marinade and the dipping sauce? They seem very similar, and in fact they are. The dipping sauce doesn't contain either the fish sauce or the peanut oil or the lemongrass or the ginger. And the dipping sauce, that doesn't contain the rice vinegar. I'm sorry, the marinade doesn't contain the rice vinegar, and it doesn't contain the red curry or the sriracha. But otherwise, the ingredients are the same. So you might say, well, do we really need to have 2 separate sauces? And the answer is no. What you could do is you can make a larger amount of the marinade and use it as a dipping sauce. You can make more of the dipping sauce and use it as a marinade. Or you could take the marinade after you've marinated the ribs. You could take the marinade, bring it to a boil, because if there is anything in there from the pork, any bacteria or whatever, you want to make sure that's killed. So you would want to bring it to a boil. You could reduce it to make it a little thicker, to intensify the flavors. But if you do that with the marinade, you have to be careful, because the fish sauce is very salty. So if you reduce it, you're going to be concentrating that salty flavor. It may come out to be too salty. So you just have to check it as you're reducing it. But you don't really have to reduce it at all. You can just take that marinade, bring it to a boil, and use that as the dipping sauce. You can also take that dipping sauce, take the marinade and keep it and use it for a future purpose. What I would do is I would bring it to a boil, cool it, and then freeze it. Use it for something else later on. So let's see. The dipping sauces in the marinade also, the marinade would be good with chicken or pork or lamb or shellfish or beef. The dipping sauce would be good with all of those things, and also with a fish. You really wouldn't marinate most fishes. You might marinate swordfish, a thick, meaty fish, steaky fish like that, but because we wouldn't be marinating most fishes, at least not for very long. because the marinade could make the fish fall apart. It would be better to use the dipping sauce or the marinade with fish, but not to marinate the fish. All right, so the next thing we need to do, we've got the 2 limes in there. We need some rice vinegar, and we're going to use 1 part of the rice vinegar. Remember, we're using a 1/4 cup measuring cup as a part. If you need more because you have more pork, you might use a different size measurer to make your part. We're going to need about a 1/2 a part of soy sauce. So since we're using 1/4 cup measure, we're going to use 1/2 of a 1/4 cup, which would be 1/8 of a cup if we were using measuring cups. Again, measurements do not need to be exact. Sugar, and again, we're using the palm sugar, but you could use brown sugar. Is about a 1/2 of a part. So that's about 1/8 of a cup. It's about that much. Just another pinch. And the garlic's already in there. Sesame oil, we're just going to use a dash of it because again, it's used mostly for aroma. So a dash, roughly about a teaspoon or so. And the cilantro is already in there. Then we're going to use a little bit of Thai curry paste. Now, why? Because we've already used sriracha, and I believe we used it in a different, an earlier preparation. So we're going to use the Thai curry paste. Use a smaller spoon to get out of here. And this really is like a paste. You can see that here. This stuff also lasts forever. So I'm using, what's roughly about a teaspoon. Let's use just a little bit more. Teaspoon and a half, roughly. And then we're going to stir that up. Make sure that paste, that curry paste dissolves in there. Now after we mix this up, we want to let this stand and let the flavors meld together for at least a 1/2 hour. But in this particular case, we're making it the day before we're going to be using it. So those flavors will be able to meld in the refrigerator overnight. And so now, what do we have here? We have a dipping sauce. We want to just give it a little taste, get that extra Thai curry paste off of there first. Very nice. Nice balance between all of those ingredients. Now, when you taste it, if you think it tastes too limey, put in a little more soy sauce or a little bit more sugar. If you think it tastes too sweet, put a little bit more vinegar or a little bit more fish sauce or soy sauce. You taste it, and if you like it, you don't have to break it, all right? So even if you didn't use the same ingredients, it tastes good, that's fine. If you want to make it your own, you want it to make it your own recipe rather than what you're learning from this video, change some of the ingredients. Anything you do to make it your own makes it your own. Okay, so we're going to put this in the refrigerator for tonight. We're going to break now, and we'll come back tomorrow about 3.5 to 4 hours before we're going to plate and serve these ribs. So, as I've said before, my wife and I, we eat at around 8 p.m., sometimes later. We'll plan on 8. So if I'm going to braise them for 3.5 hours, I'm going to want to get them out at 7:30, let them rest, get them plated. 4 p.m. we'll come back around 4 p.m. and I will preheat the oven earlier so that we can start braising right away. Okay, it's the next day. It's 4 p.m. the next day. The ribs have been marinating in the refrigerator overnight. So let's check our prep list, see where we are. We marinated overnight, and we heated. I went and I preheated the oven to 300 degrees about a half an hour ago, and I've also brought the ribs out of the refrigerator, and I have them at room temperature for. It's been about a little over half an hour now. You always want your any meat that's been in the fridge, any protein, to come to room temperature before you put it into the oven or you try to cook it. Because if you're starting with cold protein, you're behind the 8 ball immediately. And if you're trying to get, for example, on a steak, you're trying to get a warm center, and you have cold meat, you're going to sear the outside and get the outside hot, but the inside isn't going to get hot. So always want to bring your protein to room temperature before you start to cook. So we've heated the oven, we've brought the ribs to room temperature. Now we're going to season them, and we'll get them out of the marinating bag here. And you know, before we season them, let's brush this pan with a little bit of olive oil. This is the pan that we're going to put in the oven with the ribs in it. Why am I oiling the pan? Just to make it easier to clean later on. Some people might want to line their pan with aluminum foil. I don't do that. I try not to use any more foil than I have to, because it's kind of wasteful to use it and throw it away. It's easier just to, for me at least, it's easier to oil the pan and wash it, clean it after I'm done. Okay, so now we're going to put the ribs into the pan. Now, in some ribs preparation, they'll tell you to shake off the marinade. We're actually going to braise these in the marinade, so we don't really need to shake it off. I said in the introduction, once you learn the technique for doing these ribs, you can just change the marinade, you can change the sauce, and the basic technique remains the same. It does. You can always do the ribs this way. But there are other ways that people do them. Some people do them dry for a while, and then they put some liquid in there, and sometimes they cover them with foil, sometimes you do it in the smoker. So there are different methods, but this method can always be used. So we're going to use a little rind of pepper on the top and the bottom. Nice sprinkling of salt. Turn them over and do the same. As I mentioned during the lesson yesterday, I did come back just before bedtime last night, and I turned the ribs over in the marinade so that the marinade got distributed all around inside that bag. Good. See that we've got kind of a clumping of the cilantro and the other ingredients here, so we're just going to spread that around a little bit, and we will wash this spoon off later. Okay, now we've seasoned the ribs. Now we want to put the marinating liquid into the pan as a braising liquid. We're just going to pour that into the pan. Now, what's this going to do? This is going to do a couple of things. One is it's going to cook the bottoms of those ribs a bit differently than it cooks the tops. And we're going to start with meat side down. Meat side down, rib side up. The other thing it's going to do is you have these ribs in an oven, which is enveloping heat, very dry heat. But by having this liquid in the pan, it's bringing humidity into the oven and helping to keep the ribs moist and not drying out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to spread around a little bit more of this marinade, and then we're going to put them in the oven. Now they're going to braise in the oven for 3.5 hours, but about half an hour into that, I'm going to turn these over. So we'll come back in an hour and a half. We'll turn them over. So putting them into the oven now for 3.5 hours. Okay, so we'll break now and come back when we turn the ribs. Okay, we're back. The ribs have been in the oven at 300 degrees for 1.5 hours. We're going to check them and turn them. Okay, they're looking great on the top. Starting to get a little bit of brown on the top. But remember, we have the meat side down and the rib side up. We're going to turn them now so we get that same kind of color on the meat side. And remember, they're going to be on this side now for 2 hours, so they're going to get a little bit more brown than you're getting on the bone side. I don't want to keep them out of the oven too long because I don't want to lose any heat. So I'm going to put them right back in. We're going to come back in 2 hours, and they should be done. Okay, it's been 2 hours since I talked to you last. The ribs have been in the oven for a total of 3.5 hours at 300 degrees. So let's pull them out. Oh, they look beautiful. Hope you can see this nice browned surface on top of the ribs. And there's that browning of the marinade ingredients as well. They look great. Okay, now what we're going to do is slice them. Take them out of the braising pan, and I'll use a slicing knife to do this. Slice them between the ribs, so they're slicing very easily. Very easily. I can tell that the meat is fall apart tender. There we go. All right. And you can see that the meat is nice and browned on the outside and cooked on the inside. Now what we're going to do is we're going to plate them up. First we'll check our prep list. We seasoned them, we braised them. Now we're going to, we sliced them and we plated them. And we're going to spoon out a little bit of the dipping sauce into our dipping sauce plate. Okay, and then we're going to use this plate for plating. Now, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to put them back into the marinade for a moment. I'm going to roll them around in the marinade a little bit, just get the cut sides exposed and exposed to the marinade. And then we're going to take this board away. All right, now we're going to take our plate. This is the plate I've chosen to plate them up, and we're going to try to arrange them in an attractive way. Now, remember, this is a small plate, but there's not a lot of meat on the ribs, so we're going to give everybody 3 ribs. And there we go. So I can put this little piece on here too. Makes a nice appearance. Okay, so there we are. That is lesson 11, which is Thai braised spare ribs with a citrus dipping sauce. And just to recap what we've done, we made a marinade, and we whisked the marinade to emulsify the oil and the water-like ingredients, the non-oil ingredients. We did some chopping, and we made a dipping sauce, we seasoned the ribs, and we braised them. So that's the conclusion of lesson 11, Thai spare ribs with a citrus dipping sauce. Hope you enjoy it.